Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
O God, you have endowed these beings with the joy of existence, and it is you who has made the non-existent lovely. O God, it is you who has granted us these spiritual pleasures. Please do not deprive us of these sweet delicacies. You are so dominant upon the universe that you can take away from us everything you have ever given us. No one has a say when it comes to your will. I am Muhammad Taghi Jafari, born in the Shotorbarn area of Tabriz, Iran. Sometimes Mr. Jafari would come to see me, and I'd tell him, I can't make ends meet. It's hard to provide for my family. Don't worry, he'd say, it'll be okay. God's tests for us are like a radio. Sometimes he lowers the volume and makes it a bit hard for us. And sometimes he raises the volume so that we can live comfortably. He'd tell me these things in my shop and he'd calm me down. He had great difficulty making the trip to Najaf to continue his studies. On my first trip to Najaf to study at the theological seminary there, he told us, I had very little money. Having crossed the border into Iraq, I traveled a few more days and was quite hungry when I arrived in Najaf. When I saw the shrine of Imam Ali, however, I thought, see Muhammad Taghi, here you are in Najaf and there's Imam Ali's shrine, which you have longed so much to see. And how magnificent Najaf was. I could write a whole book on my studies there. We attended the lectures of highly distinguished scholars who put a great deal of effort into teaching their theological students. Sometimes I wonder maybe those days were just a dream. When I arrived in Najaf, there were at least 40 jurisprudential scholars of high caliber there, men who definitely qualified as religious references. An important thing about his life was that he studied in Najaf. He was a student of Ayatollah Sayyid Abul Qasim Khoyi, a great Shiite scholar. He learned the principles of Islamic jurisprudence from Mr. Khoyi and other scholars in Najaf. Mr. Jafari also learned philosophy from some of the scholars in Najaf, and later even taught philosophy and mysticism there. Then in 1966, with the permission of his educators, he returned to Tehran, Iran. Mr. Jafari was adorable. He was a delightful sight. When you looked at him, you felt like saying something funny. Mr. Jafari had a quite jovial disposition. His lively spirit was a major part of his behavior and his personality. There are hundreds of factors and qualities which must come together to make one have a disposition and behavior like Mr. Jafari's. Some people didn't see his modesty as appropriate. They believed that a philosopher, a scientist, should not pay attention to his surroundings when he walks along the streets and among people. Jafari, however, did just that. Two of Allameh Jafari's relatives are married by him at the foot of Mount Sahand. When you looked at him, it was like looking at a newborn. He had a pure heart, just like a child. When he looked at you, you could actually feel the innocence in his eyes. One day, I saw on TV that he was being mentioned as a scientist and a philosopher. My God, I said. I had been dealing with a philosopher all this time and I didn't even know it. I had no idea who he really was. I heard on TV that he was a scientist and a philosopher. The first Western scholar to come and visit me was a German, Professor Rosenthal, in 1961. He was a wise scholar of law. During the several sessions we met, we discussed issues such as ownership, usury, ransom, and the punishment for robbery in Islam. I was introduced to him by an American, Dr. Alan Luther, who studied the philosophy of Fakhr Razi under my guidance. He wrote and presented his thesis dissertation right here in Tehran too. Of course, he sought help from Mr. Ibn Din in order to organize and write his thesis. Dr. Alan Luther came to see me twice a week for a year and a half. He also introduced Professor Rosenthal to me. During the talks and discussions we had, Professor Rosenthal asked me, "Why don't you write these discussions and have it published?" "Because in our society it is not observed legally," I explained. Then he added, "The things you said are quite significant for the studies and researches we have in the West. You must write them and have them published." He had a great interest in gardens and gardening. He talked to the trees and the flowers, and always told us that we should love nature. Allameh Jafari loved people. Some may not understand it, but he loved animals as well. He had a great passion for God's creation. The reason for his great reverence for animals was his respect for life. To him, life was very precious. The significance of life is even greater than what today's human rights presents us with. This right to life is not a right applicable to ordinary laws and rights. It is a divinely ordained decree. Man cannot annihilate and defy such a right and say, for instance, "I want to kill myself." I must say quite simply and frankly that man would be quite wrong to do so. You must excuse me for saying this, and if you don't, that's all right. This right to live is a divinely ordained decree, not in the ordinary legal sense. Do we human beings have the choice to live or not? Have we humans come into this world with our own free will for us to decide to leave it with our own authority? Life is decided by God. When I do research or scientific work, sometimes I have to refer to my writings or the notes I have prepared or other books. I also use reference books or documents if I need access to something particular. Even when he was deeply hurt inside, he always had a smile on his lips. He was completely selfless and modest, so he could ignore the advantages of material wealth and fame. That's why he always enjoyed a strong and intimate relationship with people. It is true that the universe is in circulation, and as prophets and men of wisdom have verified, this circulation is managed and administered by the supernatural world. Early in 1960s, he began teaching and discussing Rumi's Masnavi in Tehran. He saw it as his great mission to provide an interpretation and analysis of this book. One day, when I went to see him, I found him weeping and devastated. Surprised, I asked him what was wrong. During the past, he said, I've spent 2 or 3 years researching the issue of compulsion, free will, and fatalism. I plan to present new discussions in this field so that the new issues could be addressed. But today I came across 2 verses of Rumi's Masnavi which have explained all there is about free will and compulsion. When I was young, I began studying Rumi's Masnavi, and I realized how important that book is. In fact, universities and schools of theology must understand and acknowledge the significance of Masnavi. When I began working on Nahj al-Balagha, I realized that I was studying the work of a heavenly man whose words and deeds and thoughts indicated that he was in direct contact with God. In my translation and interpretation of Nahj al-Balagha, I first translated what Imam Ali, peace be upon him, had said, and then provided explanations and interpreted his statements. Sometimes the interpretations took a comparative nature, for I compared them with ancient as well as contemporary philosophies and works of humanities, whether Eastern or Western. That, in fact, was the main purpose I'd had in mind by writing such an analysis. In 1963 and 1964, Mr. Bertrand Russell and I began writing to one another. The reason for our correspondence lay in the fact that his book, Bertrand Russell Speaks His Mind, had been published in Iran, in which I'd found contradictory statements. For about 20 years, Dr. Mahmoud Hisabi, the renowned and respected scientist, and I would meet on a weekly basis, and usually at his house. In one of our sessions, I showed him the book and said, "I see contradictory sentences in Russell's work. What do you think?" Mr. Hisabi agreed that there were indeed contradictions. "I would like to write to Mr. Russell about this," I said. We wrote the letter and Dr. Hisabi translated it. Then we mailed it to Russell. We discussed different issues with him, and in these discussions we realized that Mr. Jafari took a logical approach toward the issues presented. In general, he tried to keep a logical framework based on evidence and reason when giving his remarks on various issues. He would also accept others' opinions when they were based on logical reasons. He would read out to us some of the prayers in Rumi's Masnavi over and over again. O God, you are pure and needless of any assistance. Help us and overlook the wrong we have done. Teach us those delicate words which can make the ocean of your kindness and compassion come to boil. I remember when arrangements were being made for the ceremony for his tribute, he said, "Why would I need a tribute? I'm busy doing what I do. I don't need any encouragement." He kept insisting that he had no need for such an event. Once upon a time, some horses were being taken from one place to another. The rider kept whipping the horses moving ahead of the others. "Why do you whip us?" these horses objected. "You should be whipping the horses which have fallen behind, not us, we're moving ahead." Allameh Muhammad Taghi Jafari is awarded with the highest medal of achievement in knowledge.
السلام علیکم و رحمت الله و برکاته.